WWF Royal Rumble for the Sega Genesis released in 1993, a few months after the Super Nintendo version of the same game, and a short while before the Sega CD offering Rage in the Cage. Royal Rumble is the sequel to Super WrestleMania, a fairly bare-bones game that nonetheless provided the template for the later games in this series. Royal Rumble at its core possesses the same gameplay mechanics as its predecessor, but does add to the package with an updated roster and new game modes. Now, while the Genesis version of Super WrestleMania had a bit more stuff to it than its SNES counterpart, when it comes to the Royal Rumble game, the two versions are almost identical in regards to the gameplay and game modes offered. Both versions possess your standard Exhibition, Championship, Tag Team, and Royal Rumble modes. In fact, aside from the obvious audio-visual differences, the only major difference between the two versions is the roster available. On the Super NES, you had the likes of Ric Flair, Mr. Perfect, and Ted DiBiase, while the Genesis version dumped those guys in favor of Hulk Hogan and Papa Shango. No Warrior, though. That's a bit disappointing. Admittedly, I much prefer the roster on the Super Nintendo side, but your mileage and preference may vary. Aside from the roster changes between the two versions, you also have a number of additional modes and match types that you can compete in. Setting aside your usual single round exhibition match and your championship beat everybody to win the title modes, you also have a brawl match where the goal is to knock your opponent out. You have your usual 2-man or 3-man tag team matches, and finally the Royal Rumble match itself, where you have a number of wrestlers in the ring and you have to toss them out over the top rope. When one is tossed over, another takes his place, and this continues onwards until all superstars have entered into the Rumble, and the winner of the match is the one who is left standing. Control is, well, somewhat improved from the previous game, and by somewhat improved, I mean that Royal Rumble now has added support for the 6-button controller that was released around that time, so Genesis owners can properly play games like Street Fighter II, or Mortal Kombat, or Eternal Champions, or Ranger X. And for all intents and purposes, I recommend playing Royal Rumble with the 6-button controller because it does eases things up a bit and it does allow you to play the game a little better. With a 3-button controller, performing various actions requires you to press 2 buttons in some cases, and that's not a problem with the 6-button controller, which allows you to play the game with about as much grace as the other 16-bit version. Much like Super WrestleMania, every wrestler has the same basic move set, so everyone can do the same atomic drops, scoop slams, and so on and so forth. But there are some additions to the formula. There's now a grapple meter that pops up when two wrestlers grapple, and whoever side of the meter is filled gets to perform a move of some kind. Royal Rumble also introduces dirty moves such as eye gouging and choking. These moves can't be done during regular matches but are effective tools in brawls and Rumble matches. There's also chairs that can be used for massive damage and that sort of thing. And in something that was added to the Genesis version of the previous game, each wrestler does have their own signature maneuvers that can be performed when your opponent's health is low. Par for the course, signature moves can only be performed in certain situations, whether it's during a grapple or if an opponent is grounded. It depends on the move. Again, it's not a huge addition, but it's enough to at least differentiate the various wrestlers in the game. The only real quibble here is that you have to win regular matches by pinfall, which means if you pull off a submission move like a sharpshooter or something to that extent, they'll let go of the move a short while afterwards so that you could cover your foe for the pinfall victory. Which is pretty stupid, but hey, that's the way it is. Much to the surprise of absolutely nobody, Royal Rumble's visuals on the Genesis version pales in comparison to its SNES counterpart, but to its credit, that's about all it does. For the most part, the Genesis version's graphics are virtually identical to the SNES version in terms of the size of the wrestlers, the somewhat stiff animation, the appearance of the ring, the crowd, and the ringside announcers. In terms of the sprite work and the graphical work, it looks good for the most part. However, due to the lower color palette on the Genesis, the visuals here are somewhat paler, less colors, and also missing some details such as a gradient effect on the ring canvas. The wrestler portraits are alright, albeit somewhat grainy, but on a whole, outside of the lesser detail and the lesser colors, it looks good. No real complaints. Super WrestleMania had passable renditions of the wrestler entrance themes, but poor compositions and choice of instrumentations made them sound like crap somewhat. And in the case of Royal Rumble, music, while not playing a major role in the game, is somewhat on par with that of the previous game. The renditions of the wrestler themes are passable, maybe okay even, but they seem to have this low-key, underwhelming quality to it, almost as if the composer just recreated the themes and just slapped it onto the game without much care. It comes off as the bare minimum of chiptunes, not much polish to give it that oomph that most good chiptunes have. Fortunately, music plays a small role in the game. It only plays during the intermissions and the character select screen. During gameplay, it's only grunts, crowd cheers, and some slams. And while we're on the subject of sounds, well, there's not much to look at here. The sound effects are used in-game, were almost copied and pasted from the last game. The same punches and slam sounds and the same universal grunts used by all the wrestlers. Not much to say in that regard. It sounds alright, but that's about it. Generally speaking, Royal Rumble is a rather substantial improvement over Super WrestleMania, packing plenty of replay value with its championship mode, Royal Rumble match, and varied superstar offerings. It's a pretty decent wrestling game for the most part, and anyone who's enjoyed Super WrestleMania and never got to play this one should do themselves a favor and do so. It really is a step up from that previous game. As far as this Genesis version go, it's alright for the most part. Barring the differences in roster and the audio-visual performance, this version plays just as well as the SNES version, especially with a 6-button gamepad. Overall, given the choice between the two versions, it ends up being a matter of preference over who you want to play as. But either way, it's a pretty solid game. Not as good as Raw, but baby steps. We'll get to that one soon enough.